They say war changes a man, but nothing prepares you for how much the world changes while you're gone. I returned from the front lines expecting a hero's welcome from my brother-in-arms and my fiancée. Instead, I found them at the altar. The ultimate betrayal wasn't on the battlefield. This is a story about loyalty, loss, and the long road home after the world you fought for is no longer there. Winter 2026. The frozen front was a special kind of hell. The air was so cold it burned your lungs with every breath, and the mud in the trenches had a permanent, icy crust. It clung to your boots, your uniform, your very soul. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of adrenaline and exhaustion. The constant rumble of distant artillery, a lullaby of dread. The world shrank to the few feet of trench you occupied, your senses tuned only to the whistle of incoming shells and the slightest change in the silence that meant danger. Out there, survival was everything, and the only thing that kept you going was the thought of home. For me, home was a single, worn photograph I kept in a waterproof pouch against my chest. It was creased and faded from being looked at 1,000 times under the dim light of a bunker. On one side, Sarah, my fiancée, her smile bright enough to light up the darkest night. On the other, my best friend, Mark, his arm slung around my shoulder like he'd done since we were kids. They were my world, my promise. I swore I'd make it back to them. The bond with the soldiers next to me was absolute. We'd take a bullet for each other without a second thought. That was the code. You trusted the man on your left and the man on your right with your life. I foolishly believed that same unbreakable loyalty was waiting for me back home. A perfect, idealized life, untouched by the chaos I was living. That photograph wasn't just paper. It was my reason to survive another day, my finish line. After months that felt like a lifetime, the day finally came. The journey back was a disorienting blur of transport planes and processing centers. But as the train pulled into my hometown, a nervous energy surged through me. I stepped onto the platform, expecting to see Sarah's face, to run into her arms. I scanned the small crowd, my heart pounding. Nothing, no welcome party, no familiar smiles, just strangers going about their day. I told myself she probably got the time wrong, that Mark was held up at work. I hailed a cab, the silence in the backseat feeling heavier than any pack I'd ever carried. The driver made small talk about the weather, but I could barely hear him over the roaring in my ears. The neighborhood looked the same, but different. The trees I'd climbed as a kid seemed taller, the houses more distant. It was my home, yet it felt like foreign territory, like I was scouting an unknown city. I paid the driver and walked up the familiar path to the house Sarah and I had planned to buy together. My house, her car was in the driveway. A wave of relief washed over me. I was just being paranoid. I took a deep breath, ready to surprise her, to finally be home. But then I saw it. Another car parked right behind hers. Mark's car. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I walked to the window, my hands shaking, and there they were, in the living room. Our living room. Mark had his arm around her waist as she stirred something on the stove. They moved with an easy familiarity, a domestic rhythm that sent a jolt of ice through my veins. And then I saw it, the glint of gold on her left hand, a wedding ring. In that single, sickening moment, the world tilted on its axis. Every horror I'd witnessed, every fear I'd faced in the trenches, it all paled in comparison to the silent, crushing weight of that ring. The war I had just escaped was nothing compared to the one that had just begun inside me. The bond between Mark and me was forged over a lifetime. We weren't just friends, we were brothers. We learned to ride bikes on the same street, shared secrets whispered in the dark, and covered for each other through every teenage misadventure. When I enlisted, he was the one who threw me the biggest going-away party, clapping me on the back and promising to look after Sarah. "I've got your back, always," he'd said. Those words echoed in my head now, a bitter, mocking chant. I trusted him more than anyone. He was my brother-in-arms on the home front, the one person I knew would hold the line. In the military, there are spoken codes, rules of engagement, and a clear understanding of honor. Betrayal from an enemy is expected, but from your brother, that's a wound no medic can fix. I knocked on the door, my knuckles feeling numb. When Mark opened it, the color drained from his face. He stammered my name, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and guilt. Sarah appeared behind him, her hand flying to her mouth. The air crackled with unspoken words. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic confrontations like in the movies. Just a suffocating silence, filled with his pathetic excuses about loneliness, and it just happened. He couldn't even look me in the eye. He who had once promised to stand by me couldn't even stand up to his own betrayal. He spoke of love as if it were an accident, a force beyond his control, completely ignoring the conscious choices he made every single day. The loyalty I had seen on the battlefield, where men gave their lives for a code, was a universe away from the weak, hollow words of the man standing in front of me. The enemy I faced in the war wore a different uniform. The enemy standing in my living room wore my brother's face. The confrontation ended as quickly as it began. There was nothing left to say. I walked away, the sound of the closing door finalizing the demolition of my life. In one afternoon, my entire support system had been dismantled from the inside out. My fiancée, the woman I planned my future with, and my best friend, the man who was supposed to be my best man, gone. It wasn't just a breakup or a broken friendship. It was the total erasure of my pre-war identity. Everything I was fighting to come home to had been a lie. This is a stark reality for so many returning veterans in our time. We leave one battlefield only to find another waiting at home, a psychological war with no clear enemy and no training manual. A few days later, Sarah found me. She tried to explain. She talked about the long, empty nights, the fear, the distance. She said time had changed things, that the man in her letters and the man in her life became two different people. Her words were meant to soften the blow, but they only sharpened the edges of the truth. The foundation I thought was built on solid rock was just sand, and the tide had washed it all away while I was gone. My future, the one I had meticulously planned and held onto like a prayer, had been stolen and rewritten by the two people I trusted to keep it safe. The echoes of that stolen future were deafening, a constant reminder of what I had lost, not to an enemy bullet, but to a quiet betrayal back home. For weeks, I drifted in a fog of bitterness and grief. The world felt grey, muted. Every corner of my hometown was a monument to a life that was no longer mine. It would have been easy to let the anger consume me, to let the betrayal define my story. But I had seen enough destruction. I had lived in the ruins of war, and I refused to build a new life for myself out of the rubble of hatred. So, I made a choice. I decided to walk away, not just from them, but from the ghost of the man I used to be. I packed a single bag, leaving the photograph and the broken promises behind. Redefining home is one of the hardest things a person can do, especially when the people who were your home are the ones who burned it down. Home, I realized, couldn't be a place or a person anymore. It had to be something I built within myself, a sense of purpose, a new mission. My war wasn't over, but the battlefield had changed. The fight was no longer for survival, but for resilience. It was a quiet, personal battle fought every day to find a new path through the ruins, to find meaning beyond the shadow of loss. The human spirit is a stubborn thing. It can be wounded, broken, and pushed to its absolute limit, but it can also heal. My new mission is to prove that, to find a new kind of peace, not the one I left behind, but one I can forge for myself on my own terms. Thank you for listening. If you or someone you know is a veteran struggling, please know there are resources available. You are not alone in your fight. Take care, and I'll see you next time.